Welcome, everybody, to the Captain's America Radio Show. We are pleased to be speaking this weekend with Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Jerome Corsi is a well-renowned writer, and he's got a brand-new book coming out April 13th called The Shroud Codex. And Dr. Corsi, thanks very much for being on the Captain's America Radio Show.
It's great to be with you, Matt. Thank you very much.
And, sir, what we're going to talk about today is oil. And, of course, President Barack Obama opened offshore drilling and exploration yesterday with his record announcement that he made. But I understand, and being involved with a group called FloridaOil.org, there's a huge petroleum find that now has been discovered in the Gulf of Mexico. And I understand you know about that, sir.
I've been writing about it in my Red Alert. I've been writing about since I wrote Black Gold Stranglehold with Craig Smith, that oil is abiotic. I've been predicting, it's not dinosaur soup, it's not plant residue. Oil, we're going to find at very, very deep levels. And now we've got Royal Dutch Shell just discovered 100 million barrels of oil in the Gulf of Mexico at a depth of 25,000 feet below the seabed. I mean, these are getting down, 5-6 miles below, and these are hugely deep oil wells below which you'd ever expect to find the biological material that, dinosaurs or ancient forests or even plankton that would produce this quantity of oil. If you have these kinds of deep oil discoveries going around the world, you see it also Brazil off the Atlantic have, again, 1.34 miles down the Tupi oil field, ultra deep. They found another one 4.5 miles below the surface of the Atlantic. These finds are making Brazil, which before I thought it had no oil. Brazil was one of the leaders in running cars on ethanol. Brazil is now becoming a oil exporting giant with their offshore oil finds, and we could be doing the same off the coast of Florida, including in the Gulf.
And folks, we're speaking today with Dr. Jerome Corsi. He is a writer with a column called Red Alert, and you can read that. He has a newsletter that he puts out there, talks about a lot of different things. He's got a best-selling novel, will be a best-selling novel, called The Shroud Codex, coming out on April the 13th. Now, Dr. Corsi, when you talk about huge offshore oil fields, we got to go back to 2007 when Brazil announced the discovery of a huge offshore oil field that yielded, in their estimation, even more oil than what we're talking about here. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, Brazil thinks it has as much as their initial find was like 8 billion barrels of oil. Brazil had 14.4 billion barrels of offshore oil already proven. This new find in November 2007 added by 40 to 50% in addition to the amount of offshore oil Brazil thought they had. Brazil is going to become the Saudi Arabia of the Western Hemisphere simply by the offshore oil Brazil has found since 2005. Now, why we aren't doing the same, why the United States isn't taking the lead, and offshore Florida, both in the Gulf and in the Atlantic, are two of the best areas in the world to be looking for oil. We're going to find huge quantities of oil off Florida, and the job creation potential of these kinds of finds are in the tens of thousands.
And, folks, we're speaking with Dr. Jerome Corsi. Of course, he writes for WorldNet Daily. He has a newsletter that you can get. It's entitled Red Alert. His last name is spelled C-O-R-S-I, Dr. Jerome R. Corsi. Now, Dr. Corsi, when President Obama announced what he did yesterday, one of the first people to jump on the bandwagon was former Alaskan Governor Sarah Palin, who agreed with what the president had done. Now, a lot of people down here in Florida, which, by the way, in the last presidential election, Florida went blue for the first time in God knows how many years, they, from the progressive left, are absolutely livid and really upset at the president for doing this, and they're going to fight this tooth, nail, and sinker down here. So he may be losing some of his political clout down here with his own people. But is there another reason why he did this? Why did President Obama do this at this time?
Well, especially President Obama even campaigned against offshore drilling off of Florida. I think it's a ploy. I mean, I'm following very carefully. The Los Angeles Times reported White House Deputy Press Secretary Bill Burton yesterday as saying that the president did what he did to move forward this new climate bill hybrid energy bill that John Kerry and Lindsey Graham are trying to put together. And so the idea is, look, let's throw a bone to the Republicans. And again, the offshore drilling in Florida, the way that the president released it yesterday, is going to take years. And it is not the same as Congress voted at the end of the Bush administration, which was to open offshore drilling as well on the Pacific. This order yesterday does not open offshore drilling on the Pacific, and it restricts a lot of Alaska. But you see, you've got Lindsey Graham and John Kerry. The Financial Times has been reporting that they know they can't do cap and trade directly because the ClimateGate emails kind of blew the lid on a lot of the junk science that went into this global warming hysteria. We've had a very severe winter throughout the United States. People are not inclined right now to believe global warming. But even Senator Graham, who is, supposedly a Republican from South Carolina, I mean, I find him, Senator Graham, more in the center, but I'd like to think the Republican Party would be more of a, Governor Chris than a Marco Rubio, certainly. The goal is to impose through an energy bill caps on industry-specific, like not the whole economy, but on manufacturing utilities, with a goal to cut carbon emissions from 2005 levels by 17% in 2020 and 80% by 2025. So what President Obama is trying to do is he's trying to backdoor cap and trade through an energy bill, not a climate bill, industry-specific, and kind of pave the way by throwing some bones to the Republicans who want offshore drilling, paving the way for hopefully getting a 60-vote majority in the Senate to pass this energy legislation in which is embedded carbon taxes.
And folks, we're speaking today with Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Jerome Corsi's Red Alert is a weekly global financial strategies newsletter. You can find that. You can subscribe to that, and you can find out what we're talking about here today, as Dr. Corsi puts a lot of great articles up there, as well as on worldnetdaily.com. And he's got a brand new novel coming out April the 13th called The Shroud Codex. Now, Dr. Corsi, Virginia exercised its states' rights under the Submerged Lands Act by executive order, and they're happy to go after the oil that's there because the other thing is when you go after this oil to get off our dependency on foreign oil, obviously we're all looking for alternative energy, you need to have refineries built in certain areas to cut down your transportation costs. So Florida, that's an issue. Virginia, that's an issue. Georgia, that's an issue. How do you think this is going to play out with possibly getting some new refineries, sir?
Well, I think, first of all, this whole Submerged Lands Act approach is a very viable one. And the states exercising kind of states' rights, I think, could push offshore drilling under that Submerged Land Act, even in Florida. I think that's something that Florida ought to take a serious look at. Secondly, oil is heading back to $84 a barrel. I've been predicting that oil is going to start gasoline is going to start selling again over $3 across the country. As the pressure on gasoline costs increases again, the reason we had the legislation passed at the end of the Bush administration, which was going to open up offshore drilling, of course, Obama placed the moratorium on that, which he partially lifted yesterday, or a couple days ago. You've got to have more production in the United States, including more refineries, in order to have U.S. be less dependent on foreign oil and to get more supply into the system. Now, more refineries is, again, also always a difficult question because you've got the, not in my backyard syndrome. People like the idea of more gasoline being refined, but they don't want a refinery in their neighborhood because of the smells and the look and the blight and all the rest. I grew up in Cleveland. Cleveland has refineries coming out of the flats in Cleveland by Lake Erie. I live in New Jersey. Anybody who's seen The Sopranos has seen Newark with its oil refineries. You can have refineries that operate in a relatively clean fashion, embedded even in cities. And I think Florida needs to take a look at getting some more favorable regulations because local refineries or Florida-based refineries will help lower the cost of gasoline in Florida.
Okay, folks, we've been speaking today with Dr. Jerome Corsi, Dr. Jerome Corsi from Red Alert. Red Alert, you can go there, worldnetdaily.com, great articles there, as well as a brand new book coming out, The Shroud Codex, April the 13th for Dr. Jerome Corsi. And Dr. Corsi, we appreciate you being on the Captain's America radio show this week.
Well, thanks, man. I'm always happy to talk about energy policy, and my book is on the Shroud of Turin, my first novel. I'm hoping if the novel is successful, I plan to